Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stefan, and today we're going to talk about the increasing energies on our planet for the rest of May, specifically the next few days, but also continuing out through to the summer and even into the winter, because I want to give you all a heads up on what's happening here on our planet. You can see here off on the left that our sun has been very active recently. Whole bunch of flares popping up on a couple of sunspot groups that are rotating into Earth direct view. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the coronal hole that's opening up here on this left side of the sun and how that will be emitting a high-speed stream. If you've been following this, there have been a bunch of coronal holes on the sun recently. Kind of odd because those normally appear during solar minimum, and right now we're on our way towards solar max. So we're getting this 1-2 punch combo of solar flares like we're seeing here, both on the bottom limb, wow, there we go, and then also on the top, and then also these coronal holes. So we have that in store, but also we have things like El Niño, Schumann resonance increases, and all this combined to affect our health and wellness. I want to talk about how this affects our health and our wellness and how we can use these forces not to be seen as some sort of like, oh, it's going to degrade my health or it's making me, it's really putting me in a bad place, but how we can utilize these forces for our best benefit by talking about different factors like fast piezoelectricity and different health and wellness practices that we have. Let's go into the Schumann resonances because there's been a lot of activity here, and this is really kind of our gateway into understanding the bioelectric effects from the sun and various other factors like thunderstorms, atmospheric energy, and El Niño, because we have El Niño almost certainly happening. At least it looks very likely to happen this year. So I want to talk about that. And the Schumann resonances are kind of our bridge in between all of them. And there's some other interesting things happening here. We see like these little inverted parabolas. And last time we saw parabolas, though they are right side up, it was before the magnitude 7.8 earthquake in Turkey. So those were like these right here on the second were pre-earthquake signals. And then now we're seeing them here and we're seeing them at different frequency bands. So we see one there on the very end of the 16th. This is UTC plus 7 because it's collected in Tomsk, Russia. So this is like the 16th of May in the 36 hertz range. And then we have another one there at around the same time. And then we have another one there at the same time, though this one now is in like the mode 4 band. So, okay, Schumann resonances. They're Earth's resonant energy fields. They're resonant energies. They, vibrate harmoniously with the Earth because the foundational Schumann resonance here, this line there at about 8 hertz, 7.8 hertz, matches its wavelength to the Earth's circumference. So that is why they're resonant. Light photons resonating at about 8 hertz have a wavelength, 7.5 hertz has a wavelength of 40,000 kilometers, which is the Earth's circumference. So they don't interact with the Earth all that much, or they don't get absorbed that easily. They don't attenuate out that easily. So they're able to keep moving and propagating and traveling around the Earth without too many interactions. And because they're such a low frequency, that also limits their interactions with matter in the air, in the soil, in the water, up in the ionosphere where there's a whole bunch of charged ions, in the radiation belts, etc. Now you have mode 2 here at 14 hertz. That is a higher mode, a harmonic of the foundational mode. And then you have mode 3 at 20, mode 4 at about 25, mode 5 there at 33, just a faint whisper, you can see it. And then mode 6 is almost never really visible in this spectrogram here. They can see a little bit of it like right there. This is our power legend. So blue, indigo, those dark colors are low power. Then we have green. That's about our normal power. Then it goes from like orange to yellow to white, which is our high power. So if you just zoom out and look at the entire spectrogram here, we see a whole bunch of like very sharp spikes in amplitude increases. And then we had our most notable flare here about 2000 local time in Tomsk, Russia. So that'd be 1300 UTC on the 16th of May. And mode 1 reached an amplitude high of 59. This is amplitude. This is power. This is not frequency. Frequency is how many times it's cycling per second. The frequency at that exact moment was 7.5 hertz, which makes sense. Because as the amplitude goes up, the frequency goes down. And you can actually, if you look very carefully, you can sometimes see these waves kind of like cycle like this. It's sometimes a little hard to see, but you can see some of the variations sometimes. But then mode 2 went to 37, mode 3 went to 27, mode 4 went to 21. There are their frequencies there. So all those frequencies kind of drop from their normal values, 14 to 13 for mode 2, 20 to 19 for mode 3, 25 to 24 for mode 4. And that's typical. So big increase in the Schumann resonances there. It lasted about 2 hours in duration, and since these are the same strength and same frequency as human brain waves, if they're able to enter in phase with your brain, then there is a lot of evidence that they influence your cognition, your moods, your emotion, and your consciousness. So long duration Schumann resonances flares like we've seen before and we will see again, like specifically this summer, that's something that can really impact your consciousness if you are tuned and aware of it. And if you're not, it'll still impact you. It just might be more of a subconscious effect. Now, what's interesting about that flare is afterwards, here in mode 3, right there at 20 hertz, and also at this non-resonant frequency of about 30 hertz, which is a harmonic, we see this big increase in the Schumann resonances. So it's like it latched on to the power grid, because the power grid shoots off 10 hertz harmonics. That's why we have this line there always showing up at 20 hertz. And you can even see the line there at 10 hertz. So we have 10, 20, 30, and we see this big line going across for multiple hours, going all the way from 20 to, let's say, 2. So 6 hours where mode 3 at 20 hertz is really activated. And this is like a mid-beta brainwave. So when you are focused, you're productive, you're just kind of going about your day. Let's say you're like working on a Sudoku puzzle, right? Things of that nature, cognitive task, then your beta waves are active more in the moderate to high range. And we're seeing a big activation there, which is interesting. Also an activation there at this like 30 hertz wave. So it looks like possibly some shenanigans at play. It's hard to say. I mean, this is like related to the power grid for sure, because these are 10 hertz harmonics there, and there. Then what these inverse parabolas are, I don't know. I just hope that they're not a pre-earthquake signal. I don't necessarily think they are, because when we had these huge increases in the quality factors. Zoom out so you can read all this if you want. The quality factors are a measure of how much energy is stored in the system and how much energy is leaving. So the higher the quality factor, the more energy is overall in the system resonating. And then, of course, some of it leaks out. So it seems that before, in this case with Turkey, during an earthquake, the quality factor really goes up. We can see with these pre-earthquake ones that the qualities for mode 3 went to 250, which is like insane. Normally they are anywhere in like the sub 20 range. Mode 4 went to 59, and that's really that earthquake band for Schumann resonances is mode 3 to 4 to 5. So something to keep in mind. But these little inverse parabolas are odd. I don't know what they're about. So yeah, we had a whole bunch of these very fast in terms of their time duration flares, but they were quite strong and cut across the entire 0 to 40 hertz band that we're looking at here. So it's just like constant stimulus, boom, 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 boom. Meanwhile, the Schumann resonances, of course, are always resonating, propagating in the background, but they're being kind of intercepted with these higher power pulses. Now, we also see some activity in the lower frequencies there. We've been seeing that actually, if you look at some of the data before this, I'm not going to pull it up though, but we've seen a lot in like this 2 to like 6 hertz range, which is interesting. Then a broad region of activity here, specifically in modes like 1 and 2. We really see that. Looking about equivalent in strength, so those theta waves, high theta waves, and then low beta waves there. And then we see kind of, again, mode 1's typically the strongest, but now just some really strong pulses there, like really just immediately straight up to the highest power reading. If we go down, we can see this first one there at 1100 local time, amplitude 52 for mode 1, frequency is 7.5. You can read the rest there. And then the first one at about 13:15 local time. Today on the 19th, we see an amplitude of 60. So while these flares there are very small, that amplitude is actually higher than this one. So some notable activity in the Schumann resonances. And as we have increasing energy from the sun coming in from solar cycle 25 and more atmospheric energy as a result, both in the ionosphere and in the lower atmosphere, this is also compounded by El Niño. The Schumann resonances will increase in global energetic discharges even further. So eventually they'll start to come back down, especially like during solar minimum. We can expect to see the Schumann resonances to be quieter, but that's not going to be until like maybe 2030 or so. Maybe 2029, 2028, but probably more like 2030. So we have some time ahead of us, right? And some places on the Earth will experience greater local activity in the Schumann resonances than others. This is dependent on like local thunderstorm activity. So there are lightning chimneys. We'll look at that. We have this lightning chimney graphic there. It doesn't show all of them, some lightning chimneys there. The Schumann resonances have been linked to health and wellness, like overall health and wellness, your heart rate variability, for example, your autonomic nervous system rhythms, your parasympathetic nervous system state, your sympathetic nervous system state, also your consciousness. They perhaps are a global consciousness field. Jung's collective unconscious. There's actually quite a bit of really good evidence for that. They are linked to Earth's radiation belts. They pull energetic ions out of the radiation belts and precipitate them down into the ionosphere, increasing ionospheric potentials, which then increase telluric current potentials in the Earth's surface. So if the Schumann resonances go up, you can expect to see ions dumping out of the radiation belts into the ionosphere. And so as we're going to see increases in the discharges from the Schumann resonances, expect to see notable changes in these factors here over the next few years. Okay, so El Niño. This is a big factor I want to talk about that maybe others really haven't touched on yet. This is April 2023 sea surface temperature conditions. We can see El Niño almost starting to form there. We haven't passed the threshold yet, though the latest data does have us like really close. Like the data from like the end of April has us nearly up here already from what I researched. But El Niño will form this big mass of hot water there off of the west coast of South America and then south of Central America and Mexico. So what El Niño does is it changes lightning activity across the surface of the Earth. It shifts it quite a bit. So global lightning activity is slightly enhanced during the warm El Niño phase as compared to the cold La Niña phase. And we were just in La Niña. That explains some of the heavy rainstorms that California got, but now it seems that we're oscillating back and now we're going to El Niño. This is index of this. This is every El Niño since 1950 and how the average sea surface temperatures have increased, and some of them started high and then went back to El Niño, but we are starting from this La Niña and now we're moving up. So it's not confirmed, but it seems likely that we're going to have an El Niño, specifically also the fact that we have solar cycle 25. We have solar forcing happening right now. So as the sea ocean water, the hot water moves back across, we're going to see a shifting of lightning activity. But this is corresponding with solar cycle 25's peak sunspot activity. This is kind of our area of uncertainty. Some people are saying that the max is going to be this year, end of 2023. I don't think that's likely. But if we were to include that and then go all the way out to end of 2025 or so, and that's kind of our zone, our yearly time duration for peak activity for solar cycle 25, and also our peak number of sunspots is probably going to be about 150 to 200 plus. Could be lower. We could hang out here. I think it's going to be 150 to 200 or so. But I just wanted to show this area of uncertainty. But this El Niño is going to line up with at least part of the peak for solar cycle 25, and if we have a El Niño, it's going to continue into the winter, so that's going to affect things. But one thing I want you to look at here are some lightning observations. This is for La Niña in 2000-2001. You can see that there was a lot of lightning activity here in the Pacific Ocean. There's Australia. Here's the bottom of North America, South America. And then you can see with El Nino, the lightning activity actually increases there in Southeast Asia. And also like right there, the very edge of China. You see that increases during El Nino. So the Asia, Southeast Asia lightning chimney increases, but then this lightning activity over the Pacific goes down and then shifts instead to Central America, Mexico, and the southern, southeastern United States. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that local lightning activity dramatically increases the Schumann resonances where you are. It'll just in general increase the electromagnetic background environmental energies, the natural energies, where you are. They drop off at an inverse square law. So if there is, let's say, a lot of lightning activity here, like during La Niña, well, these waves, yeah, they add to the global Schumann resonance, but they're not directly impacting you as strongly because by the time they propagate over here, they're quite a bit weaker, like quite a lot weaker. But if you have a thunderstorm overhead, you're getting blasted by very powerful Schumann resonance photons at those frequencies across the whole frequency gamut, all the way from like 0 to megahertz range. So that's something to keep in mind, that when you have a thunderstorm rolling overhead or nearby, your overall electromagnetic environment goes way, way, way up. And that's important because we interact with these fields across the entire spectrum. We'll talk about that with these bioelectricity slides. But I want to go back to El Nino and La Nina to really show you this effect. You can see the shifting of the storm activity. So it's actually going to shift the time where there's peak lightning activity. So if you are normally, let's say there's normally lightning activity, like peak lightning activity with one of these chimneys at 1800 UTC, and then it shifts to 1400 UTC, depending on where you live, that's going to change. That has the potential to change your cognition and your consciousness at that time. So if normally you're getting a big spike in brainwave activity due to increases in the Schumann resonances at when you're dreaming, when you're sleeping, and then it shifts to right before you fall asleep, you might find that you're now having trouble falling asleep because your brain is more active than normal. Or perhaps it shifts from like early evening to mid-afternoon. So you can if you should line up where you are on the planet and correlate and figure out the times that we're going to expect to see these changes based on this data that I just showed you, right? This has a UTC time zone there, Central and Eastern time. Eastern time with daylight savings is UTC -4. So and then like Central will be UTC -5. So you can calculate this out and then correlate it with your schedule of like when you're doing what, when you're waking up, when you're most active, when you're resting, relaxing, when you're working out, let's say, when you're going to sleep, when you're dreaming. And that's important. That'll help you to better understand your changing moods and emotions and consciousness and cognition and how you feel. Potentially, this helps you better understand, let's say you have bioelectric effects from these things, space weather, Schumann resonances increases, headaches, migraines, things like that nature, just general pain, joint pain, fatigue. Then you can correlate these changes. We see here, this is just an example. This is not necessarily tied to El Nino, but we can see that there's a diurnal variation in the Schumann resonances every day. And typically it's around like 1400 local time, like UTC time. And you can see it also changes. This is what I really wanted to show you, is it changes based on the part of the year. So we are going into June and July because it is end of May right now. And you can see June, July has the highest relative intensity as compared to December and January, which is down there. And then that's the average. So as we go from winter to summer, the intensity of these things increases notably. So yeah, that's important to keep in mind. And that's going to change. That'll have a subtle influence on heart and brain activity. So like heart rate variability and brain waves have very strong links to Schumann resonances. And we need a lot more information on this, but it could have a subtle influence on even your consciousness. Okay, so space weather and Schumann resonances, like lightning activity, all this interacts with us through telluric currents. They interact with us through atmospheric electrical discharges too, and Schumann resonances directly in the atmosphere, but I would say that the dominant effect is probably actually through telluric currents. These are natural electric currents that exist in Earth's water, soil, and rock layers. So you can measure them in the ocean, you can measure them in the near surface, like the top surface, the crust, and then you can also put probes further down and measure even stronger telluric currents at depth. As you go down in the Earth and you pass, like, let's say 35 kilometers or so, there's a PN junction, and you can measure really strong telluric currents down there. At least that's what we hypothesize. There's some ways to indirectly observe that using like magnetotellurics and stuff. So the Earth converts high power signals into low power signals. So the sun shoots off a huge coronal mass ejection, let's say. It then interacts with those energies that are put into the interplanetary magnetic field, first with the magnetosphere, and then with the radiation belt, and then the ionosphere, and then this energy trickles down and keeps basically, it's like going through a resistor until eventually it gets turned into a telluric current with a strength that's quite a bit weaker than it would have been if it had just been directly, let's say, launched and hit the Earth with no magnetosphere. Let's say the Earth didn't have a magnetic field. Let's say the Earth didn't have an atmosphere. Like if you're on the sun, not the sun, if you're on the moon and a coronal mass ejection sweeps past, like you're going to get fried, okay? It's not going to be fun. So thank God that the Earth has all these layers that traps and then kind of transmutes these energies. So in general, geologic materials absorb high frequency waves because they pulse faster, they attenuate easily, whereas they allow the conduction of low frequency waves. Waves like the Schumann resonances, these ELF, extremely low frequency waves, pulse so slowly that they don't get absorbed easily into the Earth. So they're easily measurable by there's different ways to measure them. You can measure them with like magnetotelluric geophysical equipment. They almost always show up when you take soundings with that type of equipment for, let's say, an MT survey. But in general, these low frequency waves are the ones that are able to be conducted easily through the Earth's near surface. And they do so with minimal energy and information loss across vast distances. So the Earth is a great conductor for these types of things over long distances, or can be a poor conductor for high frequency signals over like short distances. So it just depends on how you're looking at it, both in terms of the frequency of the wave and then also the like the spatial component. The Earth transmutes these solar and cosmic energies into biologically useful energy fields that life evolved in and safely interact with. So that's really important because now we're going to go into the bioelectricity of all this. We're tapping into the most potent force in all of biology, and it has not been given the respect that it is due. It's actually it's really surprising to me actually that there's still so much that hasn't been done here, and so much work has been done into discrediting this stuff, but at the same time giving it some recognition, because it doesn't make sense why we're not fully embracing this understanding. But I think what happened is the medical system got co-opted and turned into a pharmaceutical system. So what's now valued, instead of actually healing people, is selling drugs for money. So that's why all this stuff has been put on the back burner. So anyways, with bioelectromagnetism, less is often more. We can look here at our spectrum of electromagnetic strength, our magnetic field strength. We see the CERN particle accelerator. They use magnets that are like 8 to 10 Tesla in strength. And then we can look at Earth's magnetic field, which has a strength of 25,000 nanotesla to 65,000 nanotesla. This is 0.25 to 0.65 Gauss if you use that system. Then we can see like the general range for electropollution, electrosmog, urban noise from the power grid, 50 and 60 hertz. Cellular signals in the megahertz range, they typically hang out here in that kind of like upper nanotesla range. And then we see the magnetic fields of the heart at around 100 picotesla and the magnetic fields of the brain at about 1 picotesla. So we have we know the body interacts with the Earth's magnetic field and the Schumann resonances. Schumann resonances are right about here at 1 picotesla. We know it interacts with these fields, and here, sitting in between the two, which DNA is able to connect with, are both in terms of the power of them and then also the frequency, is a whole bunch of electropollution. And there's tons of good science that's been suppressed showing like pretty big health effects from this stuff. So when some of you're bioelectrically sensitive, the solar flare might just be like the cherry on top. Really, I think it's background electropollution that's causing the majority of electrosensitivity symptoms. And I think it's important to discuss that, but I really want to, in this video, talk more about how we can harness our bioelectricity to benefit ourselves and to improve our health and wellness and optimize our DNA activations, etc. So talking about DNA, we know that free electrons exist within DNA molecules. They're actually, DNA is extremely conductive. Free electrons are able to move through them very quickly. The base pairs of DNA have a high potential to store free electrons in their structure. And there's also been, in addition to just free electrons being able to move through DNA and to be able to actually change the shape of DNA and kind of alter its structure based on where they accumulate. There's also what we found are these DNA repair enzymes that function based on free electrons. And so then they move along, and when they find breaks like single strand breaks, or they need areas that need to see that single strand break, sorry, that's a low res, I couldn't find a higher res, then they'll rush in to repair it. If you get a double strand break, well, you can't repair the DNA. So then the cell undergoes apoptosis. And that's another thing that electromagnetic fields can control, is that they can control cellular pre-programmed cell death. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit here when we go with this. But electrons are actually able to move through DNA, and the field strengths needed to move them are just the strength of Earth's magnetic field. So the time-varying properties of Earth's magnetic field, it's a static field, but it changes over time. That's enough to stimulate free electrons moving through. And then we also have strong evidence that things in the extremely low frequency part of the spectrum, like the Schumann resonances, also can interact with electrons, free electrons, and change DNA activations, transcription, things of this nature. And those have probably a time-varying property. Well, there's multiple of them, and then they also have time-varying property that's a little more rapid than the Earth's magnetic field, as we saw with this graphic here. I mean, look at all these slices across the Schumann resonances. It's very, very rapid. So this could be interacting with your the free electrons stored in proteins and in enzymes and in your DNA, and then also interacting with your cell membranes. But before we go to cell membranes, I just want to give you some values here. The brain has electromagnetic potentials. Brain waves have a magnetic strength of about 1 to 2 picotesla. The steady state electric potential of the brain is 10 to 30 millivolts per meter or so. The time varying electric field is 0.1 to 1 microvolts per meter, and it has a 0 to 50 hertz plus frequency range. It can go higher, though that's rare to see. You see that just really like in master meditators and stuff. The dominant resonant frequency of the brain based on the morphology of the skull is 10 hertz, and it operates on direct currents. The heart has a magnetic field that you can measure at about 100 picotesla. The electric field strength is 0.1 to 1 millivolts per meter, and it has about a 0 to 30 hertz frequency range. It's really in that like 0 to 10 hertz frequency band that's really the strongest. 1 hertz is the dominant frequency because about 60 beats per minute happens. So that just naturally creates that 1 hertz pulse wave. Most people are there, but if you have a 70 beats per minute average, then it's going to be slightly higher than 1 hertz. And then the heart operates on direct currents. Now, cell membranes also are very electromagnetic. They have a resting membrane potential of negative 80 millivolts to negative 40 millivolts. and this can change depending on different things, like the changing of like these voltage gated ion channels as they open in response to electromagnetic fields. That's one thing that can open them up. Then that can change the membrane potential of a cell, the electromagnetic potential of a cell. Now this is important because depolarization, where the cell loses its electromagnetic potential difference from inside to outside when it goes to zero, that's an important part of apoptosis, which is pre-programmed cell death. So you can see how if electromagnetic fields are altering voltage-gated channels, and there's other ways to do it too, then that can change if it gets it closer to that 0 point, then that perhaps can induce cell death. And there's plenty of evidence showing that pulse electromagnetic fields and even static fields, in addition to just normal like electrosmog and pollution from the power grid and cellular fields, are able to induce cell death. So since we run on alternating currents, AC, these are pulsed electromagnetic fields. They're not static. Like a DC current is more of a static field. It can still change over time, but it's not alternating back and forth, back and forth. And those are really quite hard on our bodies at the cellular and atomic scales. Now, DNA is able to interact with all these electromagnetic energies because it's a fractal antenna with self-similar design. So the entire DNA molecule also resembles smaller and smaller components of the DNA molecule. And it can interact with radio waves, even those extremely low frequency ones like the Schumann resonances, all the way up to ionizing radiation. So there are non-thermal interactions that the body has. It's not just you get an ionizing X-ray that breaks a molecular bond. There are non-thermal effects going all the way to DNA. Magnetic fields can pass through a cell pretty easily. So if we have, let's just call this a cell. It's not, but let's call this a cell. A magnetic field can pass through that cell pretty nicely, whereas an electric field will get stuck at the membrane because it has that electric potential. So an electric field can interact with the nucleus of a cell and the DNA, but it has to be through some like membrane mediated effect, whereas a magnetic field can directly interact with the free electrons in DNA itself. So that's really important. Okay, so known interactions with magnetic fields at this 0.1 microtesla range and above occur, and then also with electric fields at greater than 0.1 millivolts per meter. And DNA most likely interacts with even weaker electromagnetic fields. We just simply kind of have a limitation in terms of our equipment. And then also B, willingness to do this research, because a lot of this research was done back in the 70s and 80s. And there's some good stuff from the recent decades, but there's been a little bit of a hiatus. And even back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people weren't researching this, but we're very thankful for people like Robert Becker, who just pushed through, and he was had a little bit of luck in his life. So electromagnetic forces act on living tissues, guiding regeneration and metabolic processes, and by directly interacting with DNA, they change its activation. So we have these electromagnetic fields that then influence our DNA, kind of our blueprint on what proteins to produce. And you can have DNA that's latent that then gets activated by electromagnetic forces, and now you're producing new proteins, you're changing the cell type. So basically what happens is, and what they've shown with regeneration, is that cells can go de-differentiate. They can go from, let's say, a red blood cell into like a stem cell, because the DNA activation gets changed. No longer is it producing all the proteins needed for like liver function or for heart function or muscle function or whatever. It de-differentiates because the electromagnetic environment is different. The bioelectric signals that's receiving are different, and then it can differentiate back into whatever it needs to. This is really a very strong effect in animals like salamanders, frogs. It's less so in humans for a variety of reasons. Now, one last thing I want to talk about here is Faraday's law, which states that magnetic fields induce currents in electric circuits. And what does DNA do? It forms these really big loops, right? It's just constantly twisted in and on itself. So DNA is highly conductive, forms loops within loops within loops, and these magnetic fields are inducing currents in these electric circuits as a result via Faraday's law. So it's simple stuff, but people just seem to want to deny it. So that's why I'm educating on this. And I can't say that I know everything. There's still a lot to learn, but I am just doing the absolute best I can to take what I have learned and to present it with a little bit of, just like take this with a grain of salt, do your own research. That type of like, I don't want to make this stuff seem like it's 100% true. There's a lot that we're going to learn in the future, but there's so much evidence here that you can't ignore it. So you should be learning this stuff. People across the world should be learning this stuff because bioelectricity is something that we all have. We all don't have nice cameras to capture aurora. We all don't live in northern latitudes, for example, to do that. But we are all bioelectric beings. So this is why I talk about this in particular versus maybe some other topics that people that discuss space weather talk about. Okay, so let's now really finally arrive at that that realization of like how we can use these increasing environmental energies that we have coming up with El Niño, solar cycle 25, just in general, we've seen increasing solar activity. How can we use this stuff to optimize our health and wellness and to really almost like to further our evolution? Because there's a lot of evidence for that. It comes down in many ways to piezoelectricity. If you don't know what that is, it's the phenomenon that when you apply a mechanical stress on a certain material or materials, it stimulates an electric current, which is a flow of free electrons. And the reason why this happens is because these materials store extra electrons in their structure, and when that mechanical stress is applied, it pushes on their molecular bonds, and these extra electrons then are stimulated to move out of the material, the piezoelectric material. And that's because they have these ordered crystalline molecular structures. And wouldn't you know it, collagen is a piezoelectric material. It is a N-type semiconductor. So not only is it piezoelectric, it is able to hold on to these extra electrons because it has these bonding sites that can then take in things like copper, which has a bunch of free electrons. So you also see this in bone. Bone is made up of a lot of collagen. Of course, all your connective tissues, tendons, ligaments, fascia, skin, all of these, because they contain abundant collagen, are semiconductor piezoelectric materials. So what that means is that if you apply mechanical stress to these tissues of the body, they will release bioelectric currents as a result. And because they have this ability, as they are semiconductors, they have this ability to hold on to electrons. They can also absorb electrons when it kind of goes the other way. So reverse piezoelectricity is that the internal generation of mechanical strain can result from an applied electric field. So then you can have electrons move into the semiconductor as a result of time-varying electromagnetic forces. So when you are outside and you're earthing, you're absorbing electrons, free electrons from the earth. It's not a very fast rate, but it does occur. It does happen. There's bunches of free electrons in the environment everywhere. I mean, they have a mass that is like 1,800 times less than a proton, but they have the same charge. So a electromagnetic field is able to move an electron much easier than a proton, and a proton is bound, unless it's an ion, it's bound to, let's say, a neutron in a nucleus, and that has a strong nuclear force. So when you are talking about electromagnetic forces, almost always you're really talking about electrons because of its low mass and because they are easily unbound from an atom. So collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. It's an N-type semiconductor, contains free electrons, and in its molecular structure, it contains a lot of embedded copper ions. So that really gives a lot of free electrons, in addition to these other less common elements. And you can go here and you go all the way from bone and go through the different steps, zoom in on scale, and you can see the collagen molecules there, and then you can see the apatite bone crystals and how they're embedded there. And it's actually copper bonding sites that link these two and hold them two together, which is really interesting. But when you apply mechanical stress to your body, you're releasing free electrons from your body. And let's remember that one of the markers of inflammation, one of the things that causes inflammation, one of the biggest things, are free radicals. These are molecules that need an electron. They are desperate for electrons so they can have a nice, stable structure, and they don't have a charge anymore. And so they'll pull electrons from other molecules and tissues, whatever they can get their hands on. So if you apply mechanical stress to your body, what you're doing is you're liberating these electrons out of your fascia, out of your connective tissues, your intercellular matrix, your bones, for example. Though a lot from the bone will flow into the apatite crystals because they are a p-type conductor, so they absorb electrons very easily because they need them. But you are then liberating these free electrons to bind to those free radicals and keep your overall environment at a low inflammatory state, which is of course good. So you don't have DNA damage. So your metabolism can function nicely. So you can have proper neurotransmitter levels, because if you have a bunch of free radicals in the brain, dopamine, for example, is a pretty reactive molecule. It has to bind to a bunch of different receptors. So as a result, it has to be fairly reactive. If you don't have that many reactive compounds in your brain, then dopamine, like free radicals, and dopamine won't react with them, and it'll go to its receptors and you'll be happy. But if you have a bunch of free radicals, or let's say like spike proteins or various things in your brain, and also throughout your body, then dopamine will have a higher reactivity rate to those. And as a result, you may not be receiving the neurotransmitter levels that you should be. As a result, you maybe notice mental health problems, mood instability, lack of motivation, drive, things of that nature. So piezoelectric effects are seen in minerals. For example, quartz. You can press on a quartz crystal and actually liberate some of those electrons, and you can maybe not light a light bulb off of it. I'm sure you could figure out the specifics for that. But in seismology, when you're running a seismograph and you have a sledgehammer, you put a piezoelectric crystal on it called the trigger switch. And when you hit the strike plate to create that sound wave, that actually is enough force to then compress that quartz crystal and generate a little voltage signal that goes back to the seismograph telling it to turn on. So we use these piezoelectric properties all over the place, most notably in our technology. But we have this technology in us. So if you apply mechanical stress to your body in a healthy, responsible way, an intelligent way, then you can, in that way, actually improve your bioelectricity, reduce things like inflammation, and overall be healthier. So the way to do this, I think the easiest way to apply mechanical stress in a good way is with frequent stretching. If you just stretch, and you put your body in various postures, then that, it's creating mechanical stress across your fascia in particular, which, encapsulates every muscle, every organ. The extracellular tissue is all fascia. So fascia has been shown to, around the site of an injury, it'll encapsulate it and feed it these free electrons. So when you stretch, you are liberating these free electrons. And if you go outside and stretch and you're earthing at the same time, then as you're liberating these free electrons from your body, you're also bringing them in and recharging your extracellular matrix, your fascia, your connective tissues, your bones, with these much needed free electrons. So yin yoga is really good for this. It's a little bit more structured. You can do a yin yoga class. All these postures here put your body through mechanical stress, but it's not so much that it may actually be too much of an acute stress. Yin yoga is very gentle. It's less pushing yourself into a posture, more just letting your body reach that posture naturally. Though this could also be, you can trigger this effect through, let's say, walking. There's a low impact stress from walking, running more so. You could go to the gym. You could do a workout, maybe ride the bike. There are a lot of ways, not just yin yoga, but also more of like a yang yoga practice, hatha yoga. There's a whole bunch, right? Sun salutations, do those. There's a bunch of ways that you can apply mechanical stress to your body in a healthy way. You can even just sit like they don't have a picture of it here. You can just hold yourself in a push-up plank position. You don't have to do a push-up. But just by holding yourself up on your arms, if you need to use your knees, put your knees down. Just doing that will apply mechanical stress across your torso here, and that could help. That could really help because that's your torso is where your digestive system is, your a lot of your organs, your heart. So yeah, the application of mechanical stress is really powerful when it comes to energy healing and changing your morphogenetic field, because over time you're going to start changing how your DNA responds and activates your slow muscle fibers, your fast twitch muscle fibers. You're going to stimulate them to get produced. You're going to strengthen your connective tissues, allowing you to hold on to more free electrons, improving your bioelectric strength against, let's say, environmental energy shocks. So yeah, some of these changes that occur from, let's say, stretching and earthing combined, they really start to culminate after about they pick up after about 3 months in a noticeable way. And then it's almost like a metamorphosis at like the 2-3 year mark. Really powerful morphogenetic activations that can occur there if you do this consistently and often. There's other things like somatic therapy, which is really powerful. And then there's a variety of herbs that also help with balancing your bioelectricity, like dandelion, chamomile, passion flower, damiana, mugwort. All those are really good. Lavender, some medicinal mushrooms like turkey tail, reishi. So I wanted to give you all that information because as we have, let's go to it. As we have El Niño coming in, as we have solar cycle 25 increasing, it's going to be more and more important for us to do these things that benefit our health and wellness and benefit our consciousness so we can make the planet a better place rather than just getting lost in this doom cycle that, oh, well, we're all doomed, so it's all going to end. Well, if that's going to happen, if an asteroid or something, like if the world's literally going to end, then it's going to happen. So there's no point on dwelling on it. The best thing that you can do is to improve your health and wellness and make this planet a better place, one action at a time, one breath at a time. Go outside, garden, earth, just treat other people nicely and with respect. And I think that is a very powerful thing that we can all do. And that's why I wanted to share with you. But I wanted to also give you that solar update, planetary geometry update. So yeah, next few days are looking pretty energetic. I wouldn't say super intense, but we got some stuff happening. I think this planetary geometry is really notable. I've been feeling it already. So if you've been feeling these energies, you have experiences with bioelectric sensitivity, just anything that you want to share, please leave that in the comments below. Thank you so much for creating that dialogue there. If you liked the video, please click that like button, subscribe. I hope to see you all in future videos. And if you want to learn more about earthing and how you can use these energy rhythms to enhance your growth of consciousness and to heal things in your body, whether this is in your physical, mental, spiritual bodies, emotional, mental, physical, all that. Then I have some videos for you here on screen, along with a couple others that you might find interesting. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you all in future videos, and wishing you the best for the rest of May and for our summer. All right, ciao.